come to this happy place, welcome. Here age relives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future.
Right now, you're listening to a documentary podcast devoted to the unauthorized, uncensored, and untold stories of Disney films and television, fondly remembered and often forgotten. Welcome to Disney Dust.
Somebody says, well, how'd you get into the business? What should I do? How do I get into the business? What do I do? So you do what you're passionate about. If you're not passionate about it, leave it and go somewhere else. Find what you are passionate about, because only then will you do your best work. Only then will you be devoted to it, to ride the train for the amount of time it's going to take for you to get past all of these obstacles that any good passion is going to throw at you.
Welcome to our two-part series on the history of Benji, created by director and writer Joe Camp. Joe is everything you love about the South: the voice, the gentleman qualities, and the uncanny storytelling ability. He makes a movie dog sound like a folktale, the likes of Paul Bunyan, Pecos Bill, and John Henry. Joe talks about Benji like it's the Citizen Kane of dog movies, and once you've heard him out, you'll tend to believe him. There won't be much narration because Joe will say everything. He answered his own questions and spun endless tales with no need for clarification. He mentioned his wife was the only one who knew how to control his chattiness, but she's not involved in this documentary. So here's Joe Camp on the history of Benji.
My dream, so to speak, started, I don't know, I was 6 or 7 years old, sitting in an audience watching a Disney movie at a theater in Little Rock, Arkansas. Realized right there that I wanted to be the person that was making me feel as good as I was feeling walking out of one of those Disney movies. And that was where I set the sight, and then went off in 12 different directions, when we were trying to break into situation comedy writing and blah, 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 and came right back to the heart and soul of where we were, because that's what it was being set up for. And Danny Arnold, the first thing he ever said to us, I was writing with two other guys at the time in Dallas, and we'd gone out to do this thing, and he set us down on the couch across from his desk, which of course was 3 or 4 inches taller than the couch, which is the way they set it up out there. But he put a bunch of stack of stuff of ours on his desk, looked at us across the desk, and he said, "You guys really know how to capture a character. Your dialogue is great. Your writing is great with the characters. Your story structure sucks." And that was our introduction to him. And when we left there, it didn't. And he probably did more for writing Benji than anything else individually that happened along the line, because he taught me very strongly how to take a very simple, non-earth-shattering concept that meant the world to a character or a group of characters, and how to engage an audience in it so that they care as much about it as the character does. And when you look back at some of the movies that you consider to be great, so few of them are really about world-shattering. This is our superhero, and he's going to go out and save the world, or he's going to make all these big things happen, and it's more likely. We just watched again for the second or third time The Intern with Robert De Niro and I can't think of her name right now. But it's that kind of a movie. I mean, it's not about anything big, earth-shattering that doesn't make the headlines. It's not about anything like that. It's about somebody who has an issue and a problem and is trying desperately to solve it because it's very important for whatever reason. And that's what he taught me. He said, before you start writing anything, much less comedy, you must first write drama. You must first nail the story structure and the characters so that is going to be what wins the ball game for you. Then you go back and add the comedy. He was brilliant, but I went through a lot of stuff, to get to that point and to finally realize what it was all about. I was hell bent on, making it in Hollywood. And we got right to the nubbins several times, and only to have, at the very last minute, have something really weird come in from the side and say, nope, not this time.
The Wonderful World of Disney.
My wife and I had stayed up and were watching on a Sunday night a show that back then was called The Wonderful World of Disney. And this was way back. This was back before there were, Disney movies on DVDs or VHSs or anything. And this show was an hour, I think, long every Sunday night, and it just dealt with Disney. And on this particular night, they were showing clips and talking about them from some of the classics of that time, and one of them was Lady and the Tramp, and it was one of my favorites as a kid. So when the show was over with, we got up to do the dishes, and we're just talking, and I said, I wonder if it'd be possible to take a story like that is totally and completely from a dog's point of view, a dog's life, because at that time, almost all, if not all, movies about dogs, the dog was a prop. And your heart and soul is with the kid who has to get rid of the dog because he's eating the chickens or something. The dog is not who leads you through the story and who your heart is pulling for. It's some human in some way or another. And so I just said, I wonder if it'd be possible to do that kind of a story as Lady and the Tramp, but do it with real dogs. And we basically talked it into a corner. How do you tell a story without words? How do you tell all aspects of a story where you can get people feeling the pain or the happiness or the whatever, without the use of words somewhere in the process, and without using, somebody like Rex Allen saying, and now Benji thinking that. So we dropped it, and I went in to read, and our dog, which was a Yorkshire Terrier, whose name, of course, was Benji, stayed up with me, and she went on to bed. I got interested in watching. It was still kind of bubbling around in my head, and I got interested in watching this dog react to things that were going on around her, like a siren outside, or a dog barking next door, or stuff. And so I started feeding things to the dog to see what it would do. And I wound up down on the floor, huddled in a corner, just like, oh, don't hurt me, please don't hurt me. And this dog was looking at me like, have you lost your mind? And you could read that, it was there. If you're up close and personal and looking, you know that dog is saying, my owner's lost his mind, he's gone. And so I went to sleep that night knowing that this story was possible, that dogs do talk. If you're up close and paying attention, they do talk with their eyes, their heart, their feelings, and the emotions that they express. And I woke up the next morning. I was getting up in those days at 4 o'clock in the morning and writing for 2 hours before going to my regular job as an advertising agency, account executive, copywriter type. And so I went in, sat at the desk, and shoved everything out of the way, and started writing on this story of Benji. Pushed the typewriter aside almost immediately because it was coming out faster than I could write it. I could type it on a typewriter. So I did it by hand and wrote the entire story treatment, which when typed in double-spaced or whatever the format was back in those days wound up being, I don't know, 8, 9 pages long. But I grabbed up my handwritten notes and everything and went in at 6 o'clock, or it was a little after 6 actually, and woke up Carolyn. She said, "You're late." And I said, "Yeah, but you got to listen to this." And she said, No, just give it to me. Let me read it. You know I don't like to listen to you read. And I said, "No, I can't, because there's no way you can read it, because it's scribble and scrubble and so forth." And so I read the whole thing to her, and then looked over at her, and tears were coming down her face. Sorry. And I felt pretty confident then that I had it. That was years before anything happened with it. I mean, it did go out to Hollywood in treatment form, and we had a friend that we had gotten to know in our pursuit of TV things and whatnot out there that said that she was an agent at William Morris, and she had said that she would help us along the way, and when we finally got something sold, she would see what she could do about signing us up. So I sent this to her, and she sent it around to all appropriate people that she knew. The total answers were, what? Are you kidding me? Disney's already done this. And there's no way you could do it without animating it, and, forget it. And so it went basically into the file drawer for a while. Over the course of time, I found ways to learn about production and to begin directing things and so forth and so on. And one thing led to another, and we had our own commercial production company. An investor who promised that if we showed him a year in the black, that he would help raise the money for our first movie. He did not anticipate that happening in the first year. And it was a big fight when it finally did, and he finally did what he had promised, and he helped put the money together to go out and raise the money to make the original movie, and that was Benji. That's the only one that I wanted to do. And no script was written. It was still in outline, in treatment form. And because in my opinion, we couldn't afford me off the front line of doing commercials and everything else to write a script on something we didn't know we were going to do. And so all of the money was raised off of personal meetings with these investor types and telling the story, and acting it out and going through all the motions and doing whatever it was. Our head investor wanted to bring all of them into a meeting, and I said, no, one at a time, because we're asking them to do something that is really off the rails for them and the kind of investing they had been doing, mostly real estate. I said, I want them free to ask any question, no matter how stupid they thought it was, and they won't do that in front of their peers. So I want these guys to come in one at a time and rip me apart, and because that's the only way they were going to leave saying, I think they can do it. And we sold 1 and 2 and had the money faster than anything else in the process, and we thought that was going to be the hardest part. So that's, in a nutshell, it's a long nutshell, but that's how it all ultimately came to pass. And then when we got out there making the movie, everything that could go wrong did. As I said, the situation was that, as soon as we knew we had the money to make the movie, then we'd go about writing a script and finding the dog and all of that. And as soon as the money was in the bank, that was the first task, was to go out and find the dog. And so I went out, and I spent a week in Hollywood with appointments with every major movie animal trainer in town, or was told that I had everybody. And I spent my time mostly, I mean, I went in not stupidly or naively. I mean, I knew that I was going to be talking to people who were basically what I call A to B trainers. You know, they get a call and somebody says, "Okay, we need a spotted dog to come in here in this scene and be lying on the couch and suddenly see a hamburger sitting over on the chair, run over there and get the hamburger and disappear out the door," or something like that. You know, go from here to do that to go over here and be done, rather than any substance of comprehension of what's going on for the dog. And so what I was trying to do was, in one breath, set up the concept that this is a dog that has to truly act on the screen, has to express emotion on the screen, and be the one responsible. It's in a way of thinking, the people in this movie were actually the props, and the dog was the three-dimensional character. And, you know, I could see in most cases it just bouncing off. And I said, the dog has to have a certain amount of independence, because that reads on a screen. I mean, I got 3 dogs at home. It could never be movie dogs, because they're constantly looking at me saying, "Throw me a ball, make me happy, give me a thing, do this." You know, I'll sit up, and you know, their ears are back, and they're just trying to please. And that's nice as a pet. It's not nice as a movie dog, because we don't. When you can look at a movie and tell where the trainer is, 9 times out of 10 you can, because you watch the dog instead of the person, and you'll see that the dog is not really looking at the actress that the guy is talking to. He's looking a little off this way or that way, or kind of stuff like that. And so I went through all of these trainers, trying to, in effect, what I was trying to do was scare them to death, so that if they came back and said, "Love it," I would feel like they were going to be in and using everything they could to make it work. Didn't happen with any of the first bunch. There was all one of them said, and I said, "So you got to have a dog that you can teach to do this, and then back away, not have his attention locked on you every second. That dog's attention is not locked on me. You won't have a movie, and I won't have a dog," and that kind of stuff. And so I got down to Thursday, next to last day, and went to see a guy at Universal. Oh, and I apologize because I cannot pull his name up right now. But he was basically a bird guy. He ran the Universal Animal Show at Universal, you know, Studio Park thing, and it wasn't just birds. It was all kinds of animals, obviously. But he was basically a bird guy, and he did that movie, The Birds, by Alfred Hitchcock thing, and several others that fit into that genre. And when I gave him the story of what we were trying to do, he is the first person that week who got it, and it really got a hold of him, and he became very passionate about the concept and how great, you know, he thought it was, and how much he would love to work on it. He said, "But I don't have a dog. I've got one dog. It's too young and not educated enough." And I said, "Oh, can I see?" Because he had it down so perfectly and understood it so perfectly. I just wanted to see if there wasn't some kind of a chance that this dog could work. And he was right. It wasn't. It was one of those that was still stuck in the, you know, throw me a ball and pet me on the head, and I'm a happy dog. But he asked me, he said, "Have you seen Frank N yet?" I said, "Tomorrow morning." And that was the last one on my list. So I went to bed that night saying, "What am I going to do if this doesn't work? Because I don't have, you know, none of these people could do it. There's no way it can happen. You know, I would basically have no choice but to either find a way to keep looking somehow or just give up the ghost. And he said, well, you'll be done after you talk to Frank. And so you haven't seen Higgins, right? I said, no. And he said, you'll be done. Higgins was the dog. I usually called him Higgins. I don't know. I just couldn't get past the fact that was his real name. You know, with the show Petticoat Junction, Higgins was the dog that was on Petticoat Junction for something, 9, 10, 11 years. I've forgotten how long the show ran. And so he was learning something new every day, every week, for the entire run of the show. And back in those days, they were doing 37 a year. And so he was loaded with smarts and pretty much bored with the fact that he had all this. So he didn't have this, oh my God, you're gonna give me a treat attitude about him at all. And so I went out and saw Frank the next day, and as I told you, he's a very large guy and very large personality. And he sat across the table twirling on his mustache for over an hour as I went through the whole spiel of what we were trying to do, what we needed to do, and so forth. And I hardly said a word if he said anything. And when I got through, he said, well, I don't know how it's going to be done because it's never been done before. But if you like me and like my dog, we'll give it the best we got. Sorry, there I go again. And so we went out and met Higgins. And Higgins, the picture in my mind, remember, is Lady and the Tramp. And Higgins looked more like Lady than Tramp, for sure. But I was telling Frank what I needed to do. I had a fast shooting Nikon, yes, even in those days. And I was down on the ground with that at the dog's eye level and yelling things at Frank. Alert, make him alert, have him alert, scared, afraid, this, that, happy, and I'm just yelling things at him. And he's doing it, and I'm just snapping pictures and getting really good results for everything that I was yelling at him. And I turned around at one point and looked, and he had a live chicken in one hand behind his back and a rubber snake in the other hand. And I had just asked him for fear. And he had popped this rubber snake out towards Higgins, and Higgins had literally taken a step backwards. And he's obviously had some kind of experience with a snake. And it was perfect. And when I said, really fixed, interested, that's when he brought the chicken out. And boom, man, the whole attitude changed. And so, I was just happy as one can be because I was seeing a guy who actually understood what we were doing. Come to find out later that he had never wanted to be a trainer. He had been a rodeo clown when he came out from wherever in Indiana, I think, where he lived before, and got a job on studio set he got a job in the rodeo to be a rodeo clown, and he had an accident, car accident, that sent him to the hospital, and he was pronounced dead and sent to the morgue, and somebody at the morgue says, this guy's not dead. and so he, whatever all of his issues were, he went home and he had no family, and a friend, sorry, that's the UPS truck coming up, had a friend give him a dog. Said, here, you can train this dog to do stuff you can't do, like go out and get the paper, and, bring your keys or whatever. And so he did. He sat there and he trained that dog over time from his heart. He trained this dog. It wasn't Higgins. It was a dog before Higgins. And as he got better, he got a job as a sweeper on one of the Hollywood lots. And he would just go around, sweeping stuff into his pan and finding a garbage can and dumping it, I guess. And he was in the studio, and this goes way back, probably way before you, it was before me, to a series called The Thin Man, guy and a woman and a dog. They had broken for lunch, and the trainer was still in there trying to get a shot with the dog, and it wasn't working. And that's why they broke for lunch. Finally, they said, let's go to lunch, and I'll stay here and work on it and see what I can do. And so the guy was trying to figure it out, the trainer. Frank walked over to him and said, I got a dog to do that. So you got a guy, if you have a dog that'll do this, you have a job. And so he went to his boss and asked him if he could bring his dog onto the set. The boss said, you bring the dog on the set and you're fired. So the next day, he brought the dog down and parked his car outside the fence. Left the dog outside the car, went around, got inside, got his little sweeper thing, told his dog to dig under the fence, which he did, and then followed him at a distance. And I've seen him do it, it's amazing. So the dog followed him up to the studio, and he waited, and he got the dog lined up right around the door, and as people were breaking for lunch, he ushered the dog, motioned the dog to go inside. The dog went inside, he followed him in, and he walked over to the trainer, Henry East, that's the name of the trainer, and said, you have a ball? He said, yeah, I got a ball. He handed it to him. So he took the dog, climbed the steps, went up to the bed, like a mezzanine bedroom set, and he took the ball and threw it under the covers. He told the dog to go get it. And he did. And so he took the ball again, threw it under the covers, walked down 2 steps, turned the dog loose, and said, go get it. He did. Did the same thing several times, going down the steps, got all the way to the bottom, and said, okay, I'm ready to go. And this time, when he threw the ball under the covers, he didn't really. He kept it in his hand and dropped it in his pocket. And took the dog to the bottom of the steps, and he said, go get it. Dog ran up the steps, jumped on the bed, got under the covers, scratched around, couldn't find the ball, scratched around some more, and looked out, and he pulled out the ball and said, speak. The dog spoke. That's exactly what the guy was looking for. And so he got his first job training dogs for Henry East in that movie.
Television Academy Foundation interview with Frank Inn.
One day he was doing a scene on the Beverly Hillbillies, and the scene called for Ellie Mae to come to the door and hit a spoon on the pot and say, soup's on. And she'd gone to the pound and got about 40 dogs. And 40 dogs would come running to her. They run right over Granny, leaving footprints on her back. And Paul Henning was standing there when he seen that, when Granny fell down, and these dogs run right straight over because they was trained to run over a dummy. And so we had a stuntman lay down dressed like Granny. And when that stuntman fell down, they run right across it, and then Granny laid there, and they run right across her too. Paul Henning says that is the funniest thing I ever seen. Says we got a picture going next door, and I knew it because I had a raven on it. They had a raven in an elevator cage. And he says, I think a dog would help that out. He said, my daughter's in it, and I just think that would help. So I said, well, there's 40 dogs, pick out one. Well, he says, I want something that's never been photographed before. And we just photographed those. So that's when I had several dogs at my house that I was training that had never been to the studio. But they'd learned to sit and stay and lie down and pick up things and carry it and do this and that. So I took a half a dozen of them in, and he picked the dog that I had taken from the Burbank Animal Shelter. And that became the dog on Petticoat Junction. which they never ever gave him a name. They was going to have the dog named by people who watched the show, which never materialized. So the dog never had a name in there, and they called him Dog. We called him Higgins, because I also had a series going. Hazel is the name of the series, and I had an Irish setter in there, but Hazel was the maid, and then they're going to do a picture with a butler, more like Hazel, and that's when I started calling the dog Higgins, because it was a good name for a butler. But that never materialized, and then the dog was on there for 7 years, and then I retired the dog when they quit making that picture. But the dog worked so good that I just charged more money when they used him instead of the dogs that looked like him. When he was plumb retired, that's when Joe Camp came from Texas to do a picture called Benji. And he looked at about 300 dogs, liked what he saw, and on the way out he saw this old dog, which was 14 years old then, laying over in the shade of the front yard under a tree. And he said, "What can that dog do? That looks like the dog I wrote about." He had a little Yorkshire Terrier. And I said, "Well, that dog can do about anything, but he's old." And he said, "Well, could he come to the window and yawn?" Well, I said, "I don't know why not." So I picked him up by the nape of the neck and the base of the tail, and I tossed him up on the roof. Had to throw him about 2 feet to the roof of the porch, and had him go up behind a chimney, and then had him come down to the edge of the roof and yawn. And then he started asking something else and something else and something else, and 2 hours later he says, "I want to use that dog." I said, "Well, he's old, you know." "Yeah, but," he says, "he does everything." And so I started exercising. I'd ride the motorcycle and the dog would run, and then I had him climbing the ladder and diving into water and swimming. And the old dog, then I taught him everything that was in the script, and we made the picture. I took, in fact, there was more time than I really needed, but I wanted to make sure, because I'm working with an old dog. And then as we went to doing things, he had the strength to do it. It helped both of us out, although I couldn't do the running and stuff with him because I'd done started down the hill too.
And every time when we were on tour, you know, they loved to get him and start talking to him about his past and everything. And we had quite a good gig worked out before we ever hit the first TV show or radio show. And the guy, the interviewer, said, "Well, Mr. Endless, first let me talk to you about this. What is the most difficult movie that you've ever done, or show that you've ever done?" And without even blinking, Frank said, "Well, that would be Benji. And because blah, 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 blah." And then he pitched it to me, and then I pitched it to him, and then he pitched it to me. And we got our story in, and he was on top of it. But he's a great storyteller and he was a wonderful man that, and he did things by thinking it through, figuring it out, not A to B. I mean, most of the trainers go down and they don't have a clue what to do, except they know to make the dog stay, they know to send the dog to a ball on the couch or whatever, and to say, "Now go on over there," and have a trainer on the other side giving him a treat each time, so he always goes over there. And in our situation, almost every shot was, it was something that didn't play the way it was supposed to play in my brain when it was written in a script or something, and we were having to adjust. And because Frank's total training method is through vocabulary and comprehension rather than through structured tricks, he could talk to the dog, and he understood, period. He understood. And I watched him over the years and have used it all. And all the horse stuff I do right now too is just as pertinent. But there's a scene in Benji that is an aerial shot. We were in one of those utility company crane things that they work on utility poles with. We couldn't afford a crane as such, but it was in an alley, and he had just been kicked out of the house. Get out of here! We have a terrible situation going on, and we don't have room for you, and you need to be gone. And thrown out of the house, and he's in there trying to say, "I know what your problem is, and I can help." And so he wanders the streets back around to all of his old friends that have been established of him going through town and getting a bone here and so forth. And we're up in the crane doing a shot, and the thing that's supposed to happen is Benji is very small in the frame. Music is wailing this great theme. There's nothing in this alley other than Benji. Trash and whatever goes in an alley, but no other life, and it's just lost and alone is what it's trying to say. And Frank is about 40 feet ahead of Benji, backing up, and as the dog is walking through the alley, Frank is yelling at him. I mean, where you could have heard in Chicago, screaming at him, shame on you, get your head down, come on, you come here, you get your head down, shame on you, shame on you. And this was a rehearsal, and you could, it was breaking my heart. And so I told the guy who was operating the lift on this thing to take me down, and I walked over into the scene, and Frank says, "Is that what you want?" I said, "Yeah, Frank, that's exactly what I want, but I can't bear to see you get it that way." He said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I said, "You're just devastating that dog for nothing." And he said, "How about this? You do what you do, and I'll do what I do." And he calls Benji over, and Benji walks over, and he's just scratching a flea or something normal. He says, "Get your head down." And I mean, bam, like a rock, hit the ground almost. Sad eyes, the whole thing. Okay. And then she popped right back up, wagging his tail, smiling. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that when Frank talked like that, now maybe in the very beginning, he thought he had done something wrong. But the minute Frank praised him and paid him and gave him a treat and all of that, it probably took him, 2 minutes tops to say, "Okay, got it." And next. And I just talk about embarrassed. The whole crew standing around laughing themselves silly because he had totally bumfuzzled even me. But it's that's how good he was, because he can put that into the dog through vocabulary, and he can sit and talk to him. And so one of the things I would do when we were out on tour, we'd have like in a hotel somewhere, had a room full of people and couches and things like that, and media, and when they wanted to see Benji do some stuff or something, I would go over and do something like this. It was always a little bit different. Frank doesn't like to be totally surprised, but I wanted him always to be complaining about that. When I would do this, I'd go over and I'd say, "I'm going to take this matchbook, and I'm going to put it over here. Frank is going to stay exactly where he's seated. He's going to send Benji over to pick it up and take it over to you in the red shirt, and then to walk over to you in the blue shirt and jump up and lay down in your lap," or something like that. It depended on the situation and where we were, but it'd always be something that Frank was going to do nothing but sit in his chair and talk. And it always worked exactly like he was supposed to. Because dog would look back and say, He said, go over there and go to that chair. No, the other chair. Oh, okay. Take a point and goes to the other one. One time he was in a mezzanine. I think it was the same day. There was a mezzanine above the room that we were at, and it had a railing on top and stairs, like a little circular stairway or something. What do you call them? Baluster rods or something. It was holding up the rail. Were further apart at the corner than they were going down each side. And so Frank always did this thing of pulling something up by a rope or a string of leashes or something to show how Benji has adapted because he didn't have hands and fingers. If we pull that rope up, we go left hand, right hand, and finally get whatever's at the end of it. But Benji can't do that. So this is what he does. He pulls it up, steps on it with his foot. Pulls it up, steps on it with his foot. Pulls it up, steps on it with his foot. And he always used his left foot. That's just the way he was taught, so that's what he always did. And he was wedged between these two corner baluster poles and wedged in, tightly on his shoulders. But he was fine for pulling the thing up, and it was coming up from the floor. It was a long way up. And it was, I don't know, it was a basket or something that was just clipped onto the end of it. And he would pull it up with his foot, and pull it up and then hold it with his foot, pull it up, hold it with his foot. And about halfway up, the leash slipped over the corner, and Benji could no longer reach it with his left foot. And my first thought was, oh my God. And the second thought was, you son of a gun. Because he just sat there and looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, used his right foot and kept on going. Without a word from anybody. And that's the kind of stuff that he got and he always had. Everything I do as a director, I do from a seat in the theater. Not from study, not from, well, what would so-and-so do, or any of that. So I'm sitting in a theater, and is this thing that I'm doing right at this moment going to make me, as a member of the audience, reach out and caress their heart, so to speak, and doing whatever it takes to make that happen. We shot the opening scene in the original Benji something like 76 times. It was the first thing we ever shot, which was stupid. That's not what you do when you do a movie. You start with the easiest thing that you can do to get the crew together and everybody working and getting the understanding. This was the toughest scene probably in the whole movie because it was a very long dolly combined with a zoom, combined with a focus pull, combined with the dog hitting a mark and coming out a broken window at the very first. You've seen the movie, so you know the shot. And it's all one shot through the point in time where the dog sniffs the air like, God, it's a new morning. And I wanted this dog to creep inside the soul of the people in the audience as this is just a dog starting his day, as every dog starts their day. Not this is a dog doing tricks for a movie. And so that morning sniff was, all of it was vital, and the birds were chirping, and it sounded like morning, and this long move across the old haunted-looking house and whatnot, and finally the surprise of this one broken window where the zoom has gone to, and the dog pops through just as the opening theme music, first downbeat hits, and sniffs that air like this thing yawns and out the window and off on his day. The very first time we shot it, the house faced east, which, intellectually I said, well, that's cool, because the sun comes up in the east, and this will be morning, it's all going to work fine. And the bottom line of it is Benji, because it was the first thing Benji was doing that day, and this was during the summer of 1973 in Dallas, which is, you can imagine, If you've never spent a summer in Dallas, you know what kind of heat that generates. And so the morning time was perfect, you know, for Benji because he hadn't done a thing. He'd been working, he'd been asleep in the air conditioning all night. So when he came out, I mean, every technical thing in the shot was perfect. Benji popped out of there, sniffed the morning air, did a big yawn, and was gone, all in one shot. I was ecstatic at that point. You know, it was great. We finally got the dailies back. We were shooting in McKinney, Texas, so it was like a 2-day process to get the stuff out to L.A. and get it processed and dailies back to us. And then we started doing dailies in the morning before going out to shoot, so it was really early, and people were driving in from Dallas. And those dailies came back in, and they were terrible. Because the minute that sun poked up over the horizon, it just washed the house in orange paint. It looked like it was sunset, not sunrise. And I just kicked myself all over the place because I said, I should know that. You know, I mean, I've been with cameras and now with motion pictures somewhat, and a long-term time with cameras and lighting and all of that. And you know, it obviously needed not to be orange. It needed to be light, you know, morning. And what we needed to be doing is backlighting it and shooting it in the evening. So the next 5 times we shot it, you know, Benji was wasted because he'd been working all day in the Texas sun. And so we learned from that, and we backed it off to 3 o'clock in the put him in the air conditioning upstairs. And every time we did this, not only did all the dolly track and scaffolding and all this stuff have to be raised, and remember, our crew was, you know, maybe 40 people total. And every one of them was working the first movie, real movie. You know, all of them had done industrials, and nobody had done a real movie except the trainers, except Frank Ann and his wife and the dogs. So he really got grumbly, you know, with the crew and everything, having to reset this shot, you know, every time. And so we kept working it backwards until we reached a point. I think we shot it every week of the shoot, and that first section of the shoot I think was 7 or 8 weeks, and then we had to come back later because when we cut it, it was 10 minutes too short, and so we had to bring everybody back in December and do 10 more minutes. But on that first 7 or 8 weeks, we shot it every week, and the crew was just beside themselves because they have nothing to feel good about except the work that they do, and it's the work that they do is constantly being redone, albeit my fault, not theirs. Just got them in a pretty grumbly mood, which led to a long conversation that I had with them one afternoon. But the conversation, basically, in a nutshell, you're going to get me so far from the track that I don't remember where I was. But the conversation was that, in a nutshell, I am not an expert just because I am the director. And if I make the mistake, we're going to be here until the sun goes down trying to get it corrected, because what is important is not how you feel or how I feel at this moment in time. What is important is how the customer feels sitting in a theater, hopefully a year or so from now, laughing and crying and feeling the movie. And when they came out good to go. And off we went. And focusing, most of them, on what's really important, and that's how the work that we're doing, albeit, you know, not right, so we got to do it again because of something that somebody did, most of the time, me, and how well it worked on the audience. And when the stuff with Benji started coming in, it was, you know, I would sit up in dailies, as you can tell already from this relatively short conversation, you know, I do cry some. It's, you know, I can't, but I'm sitting here watching dailies, you know, with trainers screaming at dogs and, you know, all the stuff that never makes it to the final movie, but just watching that dog and what he was doing and what I was wanting him to convey. And I would sit there and have tears coming down my cheeks just watching dailies of the dog. And very early on, we had to scrap. You know, in those days, you know what a blimp Airflex looks like? Yeah, to knock the sound out so that when people were talking, that there wasn't a big going on over the scene. So anytime there's dialogue, you need a quiet camera, basically, and they didn't have what they have today. So we wound up making the decision. I say we. I think I lost a friend for life, who's the sound guy in the movie, because I said we're not going to shoot live sound anymore. We're going to loop the whole movie. Anywhere that the dog is involved, we got to be where the dog is, doing what the dog would be doing. And that means we can't do it with a blimp Airflex camera. We got to have something small, usually small enough to be handheld, and in a corner with 7 people, 10 people piled on top of each other, all trying to do a job, which included putting a eye light on Benji's eyes right square in the area that he's supposed to be looking, where the trainer needs to be. And there was constant fights with that. I can't see my dog. You got to move your light. Can't move the light, Frank. Then it won't show. The highlight won't show in the thing. So you got to figure it out. And we were constantly, all the time, doing this. Frank Inn, you'd have to know him. He is the biggest character in the world, and was a great part of the promotional tour when we went out with the film, because he's got tales all the way back to the first Lassie movies he was a part of. He wasn't the trainer, but he was an assistant. And he's a jolly old guy, about 300, somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds, depending on the day. Always wore a captain's hat, like a ship's captain kind of thing. And big old curly Q mustache and whatnot. And he'd make a perfect Santa Claus, and he ultimately grew a beard and was the perfect. He was this, and he was a great, great, great guy. And we loved each other dearly, and we screamed at each other constantly on the set. It cannot be done. It cannot be done. I said, and he'd go off and do it. And he was always coming up with lines like, if this were MGM, they'd dig me a hole. And I said, well, it's not MGM. Nobody can dig a hole big enough for you. Now let's move on. But it was looking back, a lot of it was a hoot to get by with. But bottom line, it's all the same issue, is that we were doing what we had to do, and to get what we needed on the screen, and to get what we needed in the press materials later, where we wanted every critic that saw the movie to be saying, this dog needs to have an Oscar more than most people who get one, most humans who get one. And Charles Champlin, Los Angeles Times, I don't know if you remember him or not, but he was the #1 guy back then on the Times, and nationally pretty much, wrote some of the greatest stuff about what this dog did. And then, somewhere along the line on the websites and whatnot, where the DVDs are for sale now, I think is his quote. But it was just gorgeous. I mean, he said, this dog does things that I've never seen humans able to do. He needs an Oscar. He blah, 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 blah. That's the kind of stuff that ultimately helped make the promotion ultimately work. It raised expectations enough from, it's another dog movie, to get people to go in not expecting a whole lot and coming out screeching, you got to go see this movie. And we heard the tales over and over and over of moms who would take the kids to see the movie and then go back and make Dad come and watch it. Our audience breakdown, very first summer of, or the big summer of the movie was 2 adults for every 1 kid ticket sales. And what we've always said is we made an adult movie that kids will enjoy. That's basically what it was. I mean, the very first cue that the composer brought back to me was like a little kiddie movie. And I said, no. You go back and move me with your music, then the kids will be fine. You get the kids. Anyway, I have no idea where I was when I started that thing, and you asked me the questions about it. Because we literally had to form our own distribution company and hire some people who knew what distribution was, because I didn't. And I was, and the investor told me, he said, wait, come on now. You got me to gather up investors to come make a movie that you have never made before. You've never made a movie before in your life, and you did such a good job that nobody wants to distribute it, and now you want me to go out and form a distribution company so we can distribute it ourselves, and you don't know anything about it. You think I'm nuts? But he did. That's how it all really came to pass. And that process was constantly, this is our life from this point forward that you're messing with, Mr. Theater Owner. And their position was, it's just a movie. If it makes money for me, great, you're in my good stead. But if it doesn't, you're gone. It was really hard to be in the position of a complete novice newbie, not supposedly having a clue about what was happening, and doing it the way it needed to be done. But when we were in L.A. and was screening it for all these various studios, the head of Universal Distribution told us, he said, I love this movie, and I could make it a hit if I could take it out there myself into the country and do it the way I want to do it. But I got a team of hundreds out there, and I have no idea how any or all of them are going to feel about this movie. And if they don't care for it as much as I would or as you do, it's not going to happen, because this is a cold, hard world. And this is going to be a tough sell, because everybody at first blush is going to not get the fact that you have put a dog on the screen acting just like Marlon Brando would act if he was doing a movie, and expressing that kind of emotion without a word said from the dog, enable that dog to carry us through a movie that we care about. And the result of that really was, to me, I think, when people, back in those days, people were immediately wanting me to draw comparisons to Lassie, because Lassie was the kind of big dog coming out of that period of time. And I said, well, the only way I know to put it is that people know Lassie, but people love Benji, because they have been through an experience where they were pulling for this dog so hard because of all the rejection he was getting and all the problems. And in our very first press kit, one of the things we did better than anything else that we did that led us down the road to the process was saying no when it wasn't right. So many people say, well, this is the best we could do, let's go with it. And if it wasn't right, we said no, whether it was a distribution issue, whether it was a scene in the movie that wasn't working, or whatever. We did it until we got it right. That made an enormous amount of difference. And one of the things that they were telling me in the beginning on press kits is you got to have a story synopsis in the press kit. And I said, we're not doing a story synopsis. And they said, no, you have to. And every press kit that's ever been done has a story synopsis in it. And I said, we're not doing that, because that's not what the movie's about. The movie's not about the plot. The movie is about the struggle of a dog to try to accomplish something that he has no visual, physical way to accomplish. That's the way the movie was described in the press kit, and all all press materials going out. We de-emphasized or didn't even talk about the kidnapping of kids, because that's not what it was about. It was about a dog who cared for those kids so much, was trying everything he could come up with to try to get the humans in the story to say, wait a minute, we need to follow that dog. And it was none of the go up, pull on the dog, the pants leg, and the dog wants us to follow. It was all played straight out the way it would happen, if it were happening in real life. And consequently, there were lots of moments in that movie where Benji was just on the floor emotionally. It all came through, and the dog was that. And before it was all over with, which is over a year and a half after the movie was finished, because we took an entire summer to get our marketing together, and then went out the next year with everything pretty well together. But the idea that we took the time, we did what the guy at Universal said, and that is to care enough to take the time to do what needs to be done and to do it, correctly, and make it work. And it ultimately did. The problem with my kind of personality that both of my wives had told me over occasions that, is that when something happens, something good happens, it takes me about 10 seconds to be on, okay, now how do we work that with this one? I'm up the road already, rather than sitting there saying, wow, that was cool. It's just my personality, I guess. It's not, do it for justification or anything. We did it because we cared about it. We wanted others to care about it. We were passionate about it. And it's not the opening chapter, but it's one of the early chapters is in the book is when at the end of that 1975 summer, we made a deal with an Italian distributor to do the movie in Italy, and they wanted us to come over, Frank and Juanito, his wife, and the dog, and me, and we went over there, and it's the first time ever that I had no clue. I didn't speak the language. I had to be translated to. I couldn't get involved in a lot of the conversations, and we were just there as show pieces or something. And we landed, and the flight over is, lengthy. We landed in Milano, and it was the morning, and we went to work. Because the plane got down, 6 or 7 in the morning, and by the time we had a bite of breakfast, we were doing a TV show or thing and whatnot. And then that night, we were on a train from Milan to Rome, and it was a sleeper train. So a whole bunch of everybody that was there wound up crowded in one sleeping compartment room kind of thing, and having a couple of glasses of wine and just talking about what are we doing here? What is going on? And we were still just dead tired because of the long length of the flight, and we'd been prepping another movie before getting on the plane. And we get to Rome, and it's probably 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning at best, and we were the first out of the car, and we just walked out into this piazza, and across the street was a 40-foot billboard of our dog. And yet, at that moment, I was stopped cold and could you'd only think that this picture of our little dog running, conceived in the shower back in Plano, Texas, some 3 years before or whatever it was. Carolyn and I just stood there staring at it for the longest, and all of a sudden we heard, "Beniamino, Beniamino, Beniamino." And we turned around, and Frank and Juanita and the dog were coming out the train station and coming out into the piazza, and there was a crowd of 30 or 40 people, mostly kids, around the dog. Carolyn said something to me about this. Must be a star. I don't even remember what I said, but that was the first time that we had stopped long enough to say, "Oh, wow." Oh, what led up to that moment is in the end of summer of 1975. We were on tour. We toured 120 markets those 2 years, 74 and 75, from Spartanburg to New York, from Seattle to Miami or whatever, and we were always there and traveling little troupe together and whatnot. And we'd hit a town late the night before and get up the next morning for the early TV show or radio show or whatever, critics of town and any other worthwhile print media, and we'd go in. And in those days we started it, and it sold. Everybody liked it, and so we continued to do it. It'd be a big table in the middle of the restaurant, long table, and Frank would sit on one side of the end, I would sit on the other side of the end, and Benji would sit in the middle at the end of the table with his little napkin wrapped around him and whatnot. And Frank would be eating steak tartare, and Benji would be eating, cooked sirloin. And people were always saying, "Isn't that reversed? Is that the way it's supposed to be?" And then the key press would go down the table depending on how many there were and so forth. And so that was our day, and at the end of the day, whenever the last thing was, we were headed to the airport on the next plane to wherever we were going for the next morning, and on occasions even getting there in time for a late night television show or something, talk show kind of thing. I remember that Boston was our last tour town in that summer of 75, and I had to be back because we were prepping another movie and then going to have to go to Italy to do that thing, and for whatever reason I had to be on a plane that night going back to Dallas, and there was still a few pickup things that Frank and Benji were going to do the next day. And Benji would always, when we were in the car, but Benji would always be in my lap because Frank didn't have one. We'd be sitting in the back seat, and Benji would always crawl up in my lap and just be there. And Frank we were sitting side by side, and Benji was in my lap. And this feeling came over me that I did not want to make this airplane, because I was pretty convinced, for whatever reason, that this was going to be the last time I saw him. He was at least 15 at this moment in time, and it was like 13 when he was doing the movie. And I don't know if you spent any time in traffic in Boston, but it was looking really favorable that I was not going to make the airplane because it was just where you have to go and all this stuff. And so I was really pulling for that, and I just, he was there in my lap, and I was scratching him, and sure enough, I made it, and had 2 or 3 people dragging me down the way to the plane, and not wanting to go, and I was speaking of tears, all the way down to get to the airplane. I think I was dropping tears behind me. And they went after they finished Boston. They went to his hometown in Indiana and spent a few days with some family, and to go to Notre Dame to examine a lump that he had found on Benji, and I didn't know was there. And it was cancerous, and they operated, and they got it all. But Benji developed pneumonia because of the surgery and died. And when Frank called me and told me he was in the office, I just shut the door and cried for I don't know how long hours. And I called him back later that day and I said, I think I'm going to announce it. And Frank said, you can't do that. I said, no, I don't want to play the game that everybody plays. That, yeah, Benji lived for 48 years. Everybody knows that's not true, and this dog deserves the credit. And he said, you can't do that. You cannot do that. There are kids out there going to go see that movie tomorrow. And you can't tell him he's gone. So we didn't. That's most of what the book, God Only Knows, is about, is how all of these problems and all of these devastations and everything ultimately came to pass. No, it's written. It's coming out in May. The pre-orders are up on Amazon right now. But yeah, it is. It's a book called God Only Knows. Can you trust him with the secret? And it's looking backwards at all of the misery and the things that happened and the things I thought for sure life was over as I knew it. Through the process of getting to there, and then getting it done, and then having a finished movie taken out to Hollywood, and every studio in town turned it down for distribution. And we took it back to Dallas, had tail between our legs with two choices, throw it in the trash or figure it out. And so we figured it out and wound up doing the distribution ourselves from Dallas, and it wound up being the number 3 movie of the summer the following year. And looking backwards at that, I mean, I've been a Christian all my life, but it's a lot of the early years were just because I was told to or something. I mean, it was there, and I understood it, but I wasn't thinking about it a lot. But as I look back at what has happened and realize the path that God had taken me on through all of this, that had all those miseries and devastations, like the very first one was, I wanted to go to UCLA. I wanted to go out and learn film. I wanted to get this thing moving, and I was turned down. And I really thought life was over as I knew it at that point in time. And the same thing was true several times, but the last time being when everybody turned down the movie. And all of those had to happen exactly as he orchestrated them for us to be talking today, basically. and it and it was kind of mind-boggling for me, and so I have gone back and pinpointed all of this stuff, and the book is written from that perspective, that the hardships that God puts you through are there for a reason. It's not, oh, this is misery. Oh, that's not what I was asking for. Oh, that's not what I'm doing. It was. I am learning. I am being molded. I am learning to put up with, the things that happen along the way, and I'm also learning a lot about what I need to know when the time really comes. It came from God. How much of it did I know was coming from God? I don't know, but He put the passion in my heart to do this, and He provided the routes for me to do it. Just weren't my routes. I thought I was going to do it this way. No, you're going to do it this way. And the whole master complex, there's when I was turned down at UCLA, that was God saying, you don't need to go out there and learn film. You need to stay here at Ole Miss and learn marketing and advertising, which is what I was majoring in at the time, because you're going to need it when they turn down your movie and you have to form your own distribution company. When things like that began to evolve, then my relationship, and there is an entire chapter devoted to this in